This is Electric Universe Eyes, and today I'm going to narrate an article titled Sumo, Ancient Ritual to the Thunder God, Possessing the Brave Awful Power from Agriculture to Imperial Authority, written by SFR Careaga, BSEE, MSTOM, February 2019. Abstract. This paper analyzes script in particular reference to the words for the Sumo thunder god, Yokozuna, and Raijin, thunder deity, and evaluates the scripts for plasma glyph significance. It also demonstrates the worldwide cohesion in the timeline offered in the author's previous work, and compares these with Talbot, Cardona, Thornhill hypotheses concerning Velikovsky interactions between Mars and Venus. The Sumo traditions and dress are compared for ritual reflections, and conclusions are drawn regarding the emphasis on sumo throughout thousands of years in Japanese imperial history. The stomping and dress as well as platform arena for competition become motifs for expression of the survival of catastrophe, ritual thanks for abundance to the first winning sumo, the thunder god, who abolished the evil dragon, revealed the sword, and conquered the sky, creating peace and plenty. A brief discussion of Kofun geometry is employed as the Kofun period roughly coincides with imperial flavor of the agricultural, quote, sport. Implications may include the fear of worship of a recent comet or solar event, which excited the return of Shinto beliefs from the foregone age of the gods. By borrowing this authority from rustic performers who inhabited the deity's role on the platform, nobility were able through sponsorship to tie themselves to the authority of the worship practice for honoring the thunder god. Synopsis: Sumo is the world's oldest organized sport. However, the author has found evidence that the ancient sport is based on an even more ancient ritualized religion that extends back to the pre-transition period catastrophes. The dances, platforms, clothing, and culture surrounding Grand Sumo have many matching motifs identified in Electric Universe, EU, and Extended Plasma Electromagnetic Cosmology, EPEMC. In particular focus will be the rituals surrounding the Yokozuna rank and the environmental parts of the arena and the ceremonies as they pertain to the worship of the ancient thunder god Takamikazuki. Quote, Takamikazuki, or brave, awful, possessing, or thunder god, is a deity in Japanese mythology, considered a god of thunder and sword god. He also competed in what is considered the first sumo wrestling match recorded in history. He is otherwise known as Kashima no Kami, the chief deity revered of the Kashima Shrine at Kashima, Ibaraki, and all other subsidiary Kashimi shrines. In the Namuzu-e, or catfish pictures of the Edo period, Takimikazuki/Kashima is depicted attempting to subdue the giant catfish supposedly dwelling at the Kaname-ishi, or pinning rock, of the Japanese landmass and causing its earthquakes. The thunder god, being a war and thunder god, has multiple associations with catastrophic events and with Mars, the planet, in general. This explains both the living deification of Yokozuna, who performed the Shiko ceremony and others, and the shapes utilized in the ceremonies. It also explains the importance of the sport being preserved in its ancient traditions and would extend the age of the sport's origin to 600 BCE to 1700 BCE, presumably pre-Chinese and therefore indigenous to the island of Japan. In this paper, certain facts about the culture and ritual of sumo will be discussed in cross-comparison with worldwide motifs already identified with thunder war god significance, as well as with local Shinto belief cited as example. Also, diagrammatic exploration will be supplemented with script evaluation, although kanji is indigenous to China. Grand Sumo. Sumo is often parodied in the West due to its strange customs, scant clothing, and oversized athletes who all weigh more than 100 kilograms. The idea of an obese athlete is oxymoronic in the West. However, sumo are not simply fat, they are incredibly fast, agile, and muscular. They have more than 80 official methods for defeating the opponent in the ring, making it one of the world's oldest indigenous martial arts with a traceable lineage exceeding 600 years. The sport itself was officially canonized in 1684 after about 150 years of favor from the Tokugawa shogunate. However, the ceremonies associated, such as those with purifying the ring or, quote, dispel demons to help prevent injuries, reach back to ancient Shinto rituals and practices which are indigenous to Japan. While the sport no longer has boxing and wrestling included, it retains a certain agricultural character which seems out of place in a modern world. Luckily, this resilience has helped to identify a number of elements which are clearly EPEMC related. 1. The Shiko ceremony itself is performed upon the center single-step pyramid platform known as a doyo. This doyo is made of earth in every tournament. 2. The doyo is ringed with rice bales called tawara that signify bounty and plenty. At each cardinal direction, an offset makes the ring into a unique shape that reflects worldwide four-direction motifs matching the Saturn myth. 3. Above the doyo is a hanging roof, but in the past it was an actual pillared roof above the platform. Each pole is painted for the four feng shui directions and colors: red, black, white, and green. The four color and directions each represent an ancient mythical animal god. 4. Buried within the doyo are four sacred materials: salt, kelp, dried squid, and chestnuts, probably a reference to surviving the cataclysms and thankfulness to the thunder god, son of the creator god, Saturn, Jupiter, the original fertility god worldwide. 5. The woven ropes worn, as well as the hairstyles, are all very particular. There are two forms of tying the large rope susuna, but only one is ancient. However, the most important aspect for this analysis is that hanging from the suna are paper lightning bolts. The suna are only worn by yokozuna. Quote, 5 shied, zigzag paper strips symbolizing lightning hang from the front. It strongly resembles the shimenawa used to mark sacred areas in Shinto. 6. The stomping and upraised hands are related to three important facets of the catastrophe of the Thunder God era, when two gods in particular fought in an arena with the, quote, brave, awful possessing, the great man/giant man plasmaglyph, the thunderbolt or sword of the god, a massive lightning stroke that was up to 56 rays around, and the earthquake associated with the crashing of the foot, or hammer in some cultures, of the god. 7. The mawashi, loincloth, worn is clearly traditional, and it is illegal for the player to lose his mawashi during a bout, resulting in immediate loss, just the same as grabbing the opponent's top knot. However, the funudoshi, which also dangle from mawashi during bouts, may signify the thunderbolts. It is the author's opinion that none of these things are coincidental, but are holdover elements from an ancient religion that was celebrated worldwide, which became ritual, probably part of farm village folk ritual. When sumo was first put on display in the court, such rituals would have been quaint, but educated parts of Japanese history would transfer ancient authority to the noble who hosted the ceremony. It is exactly what nobility would enjoy having associated with their house, especially if one was a powerful daimyo. This is probably where the origin of the sponsorships and winner offerings came from. Nevertheless, the origins of the sport are rural, and it is a sport dominated by tough rural-born men, typically Mongol since 2000 CE. Thunder gods. In North America, the Delaware were very clear in their description to Thomas Jefferson about the destruction of the previous age of giant animals. Quote, in ancient times, a herd of these tremendous animals came to the Big Bone Licks and began a universal destruction of the bear, deer, elks, buffalo, and other animals which had been created for the use of the Indians, that the great man above, looking down and seeing this, was so enraged that he seized his lightning, descended on the earth, seated himself on a neighboring mountain, on a rock of which his seat and the print of his feet, and hurled his bolts among them till the whole were slaughtered, except the big bull who, presenting his forehead to the shafts, took them off as they fell. But missing one at length, it wounded him in the side, whereon, springing round, he bounded over the Ohio, over the Wabash, the Illinois, and finally over the Great Lakes, where he is living at this day." End quote. This isn't Japanese testimony, however, it is the key testimony provided worldwide. The world mountain motif, such as Olympus, Meru, Sumeru, Taishan, Sinai, etc., is ubiquitous. In places where mountains were insufficient, pyramids, even giant ones, were introduced in the archaic, megalithic, and transition periods as stand-ins. However, in rustic Japan, from 1500 to 2500 YBP, this would have been very impractical. Instead, the use of these raised doyo would have procured an agricultural stand-in. They are made of pressed or stamped soil and then purified during use with the spreading of salt. Interestingly, a fine layer of soft soil is used to create a halo effect around the ring itself, but this may be just functional as it helps to identify when a step-out, ring-out occurs. The doyo additionally reflects traditional Shinto shrines. The thunder god has many names. Even in Japan, Raijin or Raiden, Mars, Izanagi, Saturn, and Izanami, Jupiter, and Susanoo. This is perfectly reflective of the Greek, Norse, and Hindu lineages, typified by the creator being replaced by the sun who wielded the cosmic electrical power, replaced again with his son. The battle with the brother is also a worldwide motif. Osiris versus Set, Thor versus Loki, Mahabharata, etc. And in this case is typified by the legendary battle with Fujin, with whom he had multiple battles for the control of the sky, the arena. This is reflected in Greek culture in the battle between Ares and Athena. The battle was typified by the wild hair of the green or pale goddess, Venus, and the ferocious red face of the war god, Mars. However, most of the world typically identified positive attributes with the war god, including blood sacrifice of one's enemies, while attributing negative and or female attributes to the evening star due to its wandering, unpredictable course, said to be the evil of a society or family out of balance, and the long flowing hair of the planet deity. Whereas Fujin, being Venus, was associated with ritual heart sacrifice. Especially in Mesoamerica, Rajin was associated with the triplex power of the pantheon throughout the world. Japan was no exception. Could this legendary battle have been the inspiration for sumo? It isn't unreasonable to think that part of ceremonies celebrating spring, fall, or certain astronomical dates in ancient Japan, that part of the celebration might have been wrestling and boxing festivities defined by a simple rule: push out and control the cosmic mountain. Even in the West, we retain the saying, quote, "king of the mountain" or "king of the hill." Could also the agricultural obsessions or thankfulness be associated with catastrophes which limited access to food goods or presented major difficulties in survival? The author thinks so, based upon previous works and research into the cultural beliefs worldwide. Quote, "The oldest sources for Susanoo myths are the ca. 712 CE Kojiki and ca. 720 CE Nihon Shoki. They tell of a long-standing rivalry between Sasuno and his sister. When he was to leave heaven by orders of Izanagi, he went to bid his sister goodbye. Amaterasu was suspicious, but when Susanoo proposed a challenge to prove his sincerity, she accepted. Each of them took an object of the others, and from it birthed gods and goddesses. Amaterasu birthed 3 women from Susanoo's Tatsuka no Tsurugi, while he birthed 5 men from her necklace. Claiming the gods were hers because they were born of her necklace, and the goddesses were his, she decided that she had won the challenge as his item produced women. The 2 were content for a time, but Susanoo, the storm god, became relentless. In a fit of rage, he destroyed his sister's rice fields, hurled a flayed pony at her loom, and killed one of her attendants. Amaterasu, who was in a fury and grief, hid inside the Amo no Luato, heavenly rock cave, thus effectively hiding the sun for a long period of time." End quote. It seems clear to the author that the destructions that were recorded elsewhere did not exclude the Japanese, but that they felt the sting of difficulty, including plagues of darkness and earthquakes and famine. Japan has long been known as an island of fierce warriors and strife, including difficult political climates. It has birthed not one, two, or three, but four of the world's most ferocious fighting styles: jiu-jitsu, samurai budo, swordplay, historical ninjutsu, and sumo. Meanwhile, the thunder god, or summer god, has also been associated with war and martiality. Quote, "When the time came, the serpent actually appeared. It had an 8-forked head and an 8-forked tail. Its eyes were red, like the winter cherry, and on its back firs and cypresses were growing. As it crawled, it extended over a space of 8 hills and 8 valleys. Now when it came and found the sake, each head drank up 1 tub, and it became drunken and fell asleep. The Susanoo no Mikoto drew the 10-span sword which he wore and chopped the serpent into small pieces. When he came to the tail, the edge of his sword was slightly notched, and he therefore split open the tail and examined it. In the inside there was a sword. This is the sword which is called Kusanagi no Tsurugi. It is also possible that the roof placed above the ring was a reference either to the crescent heaven or to the need for mankind to survive in caves or dolmens, which are also famously found in Japan. The author thinks so, but unfortunately there doesn't appear to be enough evidence or direct reference to make it absolutely clear. So for now, that is excluded from the current analysis. However, the 4 pillars are most certainly a worldwide reference to the cosmic pole motif. While many such poles worldwide may be explicit phallic references or outdoor scepters of power to the masculine principle and or king nobility, it must not be forgotten that phalluses are referenced in Chinese characters, kanji. Compare, for example, the following sequences of words. Person. The original oracles look alternately like an old man bent or like a lightning bolt and may have reflected God. Large man. Clearly the great man plasma glyph, again reflecting God. God, or celestial. The modern form shows, quote, one above the great, but seals show the great man glyph and the creator glyph with crescent ship. Extreme, very, too much. The dangling stroke is a phallus, see da. Calamity or catastrophe, compound from fire, huo, and building mian, meaning dolmen, take cover. Kanji for sumo terms. The analysis of Chinese words has been predicted to contain a large number of plasma glyphs, similar as per Rongo script, which are direct pictographs. The author maintains that the above is a shining and well-known example of EPEMC glyph analysis, which reveals an underlying theme from the past. But will analysis reveal similar aspects from sumo words? Let us first examine the thunder god's names. Takamikazuki, brave, awful, possessing. Raijin, thunder god. Yokozuna, horizontal rope. As can be seen from tables 1 and 2, clear plasma glyph references can be found, and a similar connection of characters is found in the words for the sumo thunder god. It is expected that other names for the thunder, storm, summer, war god will reveal the same thread of characters relating to the Vajra plasma glyph. The connections between the concepts of a thunder god and sumo, particularly Yokozuna, are not in dispute. The question is if the motifs enacted in manifest form through ritual and arena, dress, and combat reflect the words and beliefs from behind the formation of the words from chosen kanji that were used for Shinto ideas. The author maintains there is a strong overlap, and this is a powerful indicator that the sport is actually much, much older than is previously thought, and represents a seriously dangerous and motivational period in Japanese and mankind worldwide cultural memory. What Kofun reveal? Quite separate from sumo, there is another 1700-year-old tradition which makes direct reference to the formation predicted by Dave Talbot for when Mars descended and spread red dust and plague across Asia. Quote, the Kofun tumuli have assumed various shapes throughout history. The most common type of Kofun is known as Zenpo Koenfun, which is shaped like a keyhole, having one square end and one circular end when viewed from above. There are also circular type, Enpun, quote, two conjoined rectangles, typed Zenpo Kohofun, and square type, Hofun Kofun. Being shaped like a keyhole is our cultural filter because the Japanese did not have locks and keys. The shape reflects the Chinese idiom, quote, heaven is round, earth is square. But the actual formation of Kofun are clearly depicting, while also showcasing the cosmic hill. What is most interesting is how the formation is not square but a clear 3D attempt to depict a 3D shaft, forced perspective, or column of dust extending from Mars. To this day, Mars still has worldwide dust storms whenever it and Earth are on their closest approach. Meanwhile, Earth and Venus share orbital resonances, which further support the alignments specified by Talbot Thornhill's EU theory, but also by glyphic representations identified by the author separately in the Ohio River Valley. Compare the asymmetric glyphs of Kentucky and Ohio's earthworks with seals in Table 2. It is important to understand that certain comet-related events in the 3rd and 6th centuries encouraged continued worship of the Martian war god in Asia, North and Central America, and Scandinavia. These comets were depicted by the cultures as both supremely destructive in relating to Martian rocks, called thunder eggs in North America. Continued worship of the war god, especially as the thunder deity, would have represented one of the most essential religious and therefore government practices in such cultures, because it would provide legitimacy for the imperial family and particularly for the, quote, son of heaven, as the emperor was referred to in both China and Japan. In China, the Tang and Ming dynasty were patrons of Xuanu, the thunder god of Wudong Mountain, and enjoyed incredible cultural success. What the Kofun also reveal is that the planet must have come close enough not only to see his long battle scar, Valles Marineris, but the 3 prominent volcanoes which align thereon. These mounds would have been interpreted for their trifold meaning. 1. Literally the 3 fathers and sons or 3 world-ending sky changings. 2. The 3 powers. 3. The 3-star belt of the great man's constellation of Orion. Even in Kentucky, during the mound-building period, these alignments were remembered, although evidence may show them to be remembered via the Cygnus cross instead of Orion. In any case, the 3 powers are worldwide religious motifs which symbolize both the god and gods and the holy authority of imperial and regal nobility. The divine rights of the, quote, son of heaven were not to be disobeyed. Although the shogunate usurped the royal sway from the Japanese emperors for most of the period from then till the Meiji Restoration, it was the Emperor of Japan who formally surrendered Japan to America in World War II, when the latter used a real dust-spreading weapon of the gods, the atom bomb, upon 2 of Japan's cities. This act was the consummate sumo and represented to the Japanese a latent cultural signal that would have unmistakably determined who was the yokozuna of the world stage. It is not clear that the U.S. government was aware of this cultural milieu inherent in Japan, but nevertheless it had the desired effect of depowering the Japanese government. In the end, the god of war and thunder did give legitimacy to the U.S. occupation and altered the course of Japanese history. Worship of the, quote, Son of God is symbolized elsewhere in Western culture, which will not be discussed here. Suffice it to say the surrender was made on Wednesday, Woden's or Odin's Day, and signed on a Sunday. Conclusions. The Japanese are often thought of as being completely immigrated from China. However, indigenous beliefs extend back to upwards of 2200 BCE or to 1680 BCE, with ritual practices which must date at least to 600 BCE and demonstrate earlier indigenous Shinto beliefs. Furthermore, sumo is a tradition which was later absorbed into court practices, but which has strong agricultural ties and direct references to destructions caused by the thunderbolts of the gods, which ended life and burned crops. There may have been latent thunderbolt activities during the megalithic and transition periods, whereas typically the thunderbolts were associated with earlier catastrophes relating to the gas giants Jupiter and Saturn. This is supported by glyphic references to stomping, hammering, a weapon of the god in the form of lightning and thunder. Some of the glyphs show these weapons and/or a great large man coming down to stomp the ground. They also reveal plasma motions between bodies in the sky and show prayer to multiple spheres in obeisance to the god. It seems that Dark Age references to the thunder god's hammer in Scandinavia were seen as stomping in Japan, and may have indeed been references to earthquakes associated with these thunderbolts, and with the comet tail depicted as dragons and ropes in the Suna. The battle between Raijin and Fujin typifies the Mars-Venus clash and shows that the Japanese interpreted this as great round, obese men, spheres with clashed fast and pushed each other out of the arena of the sky, the roof of the sky, and reflected it into a wrestling and fighting tradition which became the sport of sumo. Yokozuna being the sole survivors of 15 days of clashing 5 times a year, represent living deities on earth. These clashes therefore render authority to the houses, or heya, of the sumo wrestler and their patrons, who in turn borrow the power of the agricultural god to increase their authority. This is a sport inherited from a samurai era which harkened back to the power of the thunder god in order to create a legitimacy of martial rule over the peasantry. The power of the thunder god remains paramount in the subsurface of Japanese culture, which is and always has been inherently martial and agricultural. From Dragon Ball and anime in general to the very surrender of Japan at the end of World War II, an inherent respect of the summer storm deity has provided a distinct cultural stamp which is typified in Grand Sumo, and in particular the Yokozuna rank.